Now, today, thousands of protesters formed a 28-mile human chain across Hong Kong. It's the latest in a series of protests over 11 weeks that have seen escalating violence between pro-democracy protesters and police. So, what's next for Hong Kong and China? Well, joining me now is Minister Ma Hui, who is from the Republic of China's embassy here in the UK. Thank you very much indeed for being with us on Sky News. These protests, this crisis, all began because of the introduction of an extradition bill, something the protesters are very concerned about. The Hong Kong government has suspended it. Can you tell the people of Hong Kong that it will be withdrawn as they're demanding?
First of all, let me correct you that you didn't pronounce the official name of China correctly. I'm from the Embassy of the People's Republic of China.
My apologies.
Whether the Hong Kong government, Hong Kong SAR government, has now decided to suspend the extradition bill, whether they will withdraw it or not, it's up to the Hong Kong SAR government. Actually, as the chief executive has said publicly, that the Hong Kong government proposed the amendment to the fugitive ordinance bill. And they have also decided to suspend it. So the position of the Chinese government has been support, understand. So whatever the Hong Kong SAR government decides, the central government is behind that.
So you have no influence at all over the Hong Kong government?
I think it's up to the Hong Kong SAR government to do it.
But you don't have any influence over that decision?
No, I can't say have no influence because what we practice is one country, two systems. So Hong Kong people exercise high degree of autonomy. Hong Kong people governing themselves, but under the framework of one China. Often we have to remember that it is one country, two systems, not two country, two systems. One country is equally important, like also the two systems. You cannot, or we cannot, emphasize one to the neglect of the other side.
So if it's down to the decision of Carrie Lam and the Hong Kong government, why are so many people protesting on the streets? Why are they saying that Beijing is encroaching on their freedoms?
I think there is a huge misunderstanding of the real situation. Actually, the amendment of the ordinance does not violate the one country, two systems, or does not enroach of their rights, because of course there is a long story to tell about how the amendment came about. To amend the ordinance is to plug the loophole of the Hong Kong legal system. Actually, it contributes to justice rather than the otherwise.
This is what one pro-democracy leader said, Martin Lee QC. All the Chinese authorities, need is a witness statement saying you committed some crime 20 years ago. That is enough. And then you'll be tried according to Chinese law in a Chinese court. And who can trust that system? That is what the people are worried about. They're worried that this extradition bill will mean people are facing unfair trials in China.
First of all, will you and your colleagues stop labeling the people who joined the protest as pro-democracy protesters, and misusing the label doesn't represent the actual truth.
What are they?
Because they are using the pro-democracy, using the cover of pro-democracy to engage in violent, illegal activities. We could see this. They ransacked the legislature. They attacked the central government's liaison office in Hong Kong. They defaced the national emblems, including and also the national flag. So they engage in violence, illegal activities. So you shouldn't misuse your label.
That's a very small minority. 1.7 million people marched on Sunday, and I was there to see them. The vast majority were peaceful, law-abiding members of the Hong Kong society. The numbers involved in violence are tiny.
I admit that some of the protests are peaceful protests because
the majority. I think you have to say the majority.
If it's a peaceful protest, there will be no problem. There will be no problem because I see protests also here in London. If it's peaceful, there will be no problem whatsoever. But if some of the radicals, extremists, engage in violence, then it's no longer peaceful protester. Actually, I read that Martin Lee himself, years ago, first proposed the amendment of the ordinance, actually, because at one time, somebody from Hong Kong committed a crime, for instance, in the Chinese mainland, and he didn't want that person to be tried in the Chinese mainland, saying that the legal system on the Chinese mainland was not good enough. So he wanted Hong Kong people who committed crimes in the Chinese mainland to be extradited back to Hong Kong. And now he is strongly opposed to the ordinance, to the amendment of the ordinance. So we could see clearly this flip and the flop and what he's doing.
OK, let's just go back to what you were saying about the violence involved, because it is a small number of people who have been violent, but they say they're reacting to police brutality. This is what Amnesty International says. They say Hong Kong police have once again used tear gas and rubber bullets in a way that has fallen short of international standards. Firing at retreating protesters in confined areas where they had little time to leave goes against the purported objective of dispersing a crowd. Violence directed at police doesn't give officers a green light to operate outside of international policing standards. They're saying that they're retaliating against a brutal police force.
It is very unfair to accuse the police of using excessive violence. The police chief has already made it very clear. If the protesters followed the law, if the protests are peaceful protests, if the police were not attacked, were not provoked, the police has no reason to use force. Even if when they use the force, it's minimum. I think the Hong Kong police are very restrained compared to international standard.
OK.
So we should find out who actually started the violence, who promoted the police, rather than accuse the police, who is the symbol of rule of law. They are merely enforcing the rule of law.
Yeah, and of course that is something that often is very difficult to ascertain during those protests. I want to just play a short extract of a speech that was given by the ambassador talking about how China might respond to the protests. Let's have a listen.
Further into unrest uncontrollable for the government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the central government would not sit on its hands and watch. We have enough solutions and enough power within the limit of basic law to quell any unrest swiftly.
He talks about quelling unrest quickly. What does he mean by that? What tools could he use? Because we've seen troops amassing on the border with Hong Kong. Could you ever see a situation where live ammunition could be used on the island of Hong Kong by troops?
What is happening in Hong Kong now, it is very obvious that apart from some peaceful protests, some people have degenerated into violent criminal activities. If the violence, if the disorder continues, it will harm the interests of Hong Kong, harm the livelihood of the Hong Kong people, and also harm the interests of international business, actually. So the position of the central government is very clear that if the situation continues to degenerate and becomes uncontrollable for the Hong Kong SAR government, the central government will not sit on its hands. Actually,
so
if you read
that we've seen could go into Hong Kong.
If you read the Hong Kong Basic Law and the Garrison Law, you will find your answer.
So the troops could effectively go into Hong Kong if it's thought that is necessary?
I mean, the Chinese government position has been very clear, and you find your answers in the Basic Law and the Garrison Law. OK. And will I also find an answer to that question, whether they'd use live ammunition? Well, it's all in the law. You need to read the law carefully. But you must have an answer to that. Well, you tell me what the law is. I haven't got it in front of me here. You tell me, are Chinese troops ordered by Beijing, if they came to quell unrest, could they use live ammunition? I think when the situation arises, obviously the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government will find a proper solution to the issue. That is to deal with the unrest swiftly, quell the unrest swiftly, and will not let this happen.
Okay, and if that means live ammunition, then
that's what you said, and that's a very hypothetical question. I cannot possibly comment on it.
Okay, I want to talk about Simon Chang. He's a Hong Kong citizen who works for the British consulate. He'd been across the border into Shenzhen for a day's work, was returning home to Hong Kong when he was detained. Do you know what the situation is now regarding him?
I think now the situation is very clear that media, including yourself, the Sky News, has widely reported what has happened to this person. First of all, he is a Chinese citizen. So he's a Chinese citizen, and he broke the public security law on the Chinese mainland. So now he is dealt with according to the law. So everyone is equal in the eyes of the law.
There's been talk that he was arrested for prostitution. Is that correct? That report?
That's the report. You read the same report as I read.
I mean, the only reason I'm asking is that if he was on a high-speed train going from Shenzhen to Hong Kong, how could he have been visiting a brothel unless there's one on the train? This
is essentially what we say a public security issue. I don't have all the specifics, but the information we have is he violated public security law and was dealt with according to the law. According to the law, OK.
The Foreign Office, I don't know if you've seen this statement. Apologies if you haven't. It's come out fairly recently from the Foreign Office. They are saying that they're changing their travel advice for people travelling to Hong Kong. This is what they say. In light of ongoing protests and demonstrations in Hong Kong, there are reports of greater scrutiny from mainland authorities at border crossings between the mainland and Hong Kong. You should be aware that the thresholds for detention and prosecution in China differ from those in Hong Kong. What do you make of that?
I think we do things, certainly sometimes we do things differently. You drive on the left, we drive on the right. But I guess the Chinese authorities will, of course, act in accordance with the Chinese laws, and they have responsibility for safety and public security. And the travel advisory from the Foreign Office, the UK Foreign Office, clearly showed that the situation in Hong Kong is worrying. If the violence, if disorder goes on, it will affect Hong Kong economy, affect the livelihood of the Hong Kong people. And their daily lives will be severely affected. So the majority of the Hong Kong people, the mainstream public opinion of the Hong Kong people is that normalcy must be restored, order should be restored. So let's hope that violence will come to an end as soon as possible.
But it's not a good look, is it, when the British Foreign Office is advising people to be very careful on the border because they may get stopped, they may have their phones investigated. It doesn't look good on the international stage, does it? They're not warning people not to go to Hong Kong because of the protests. They're warning them not to go to Hong Kong because of how things are dealt with on the border.
No, I think as soon as according to what I have already read, about 30-something countries have issued travel advisories to Hong Kong, which means that the violence in Hong Kong is affecting the safety of travelers and tourists. Actually, I read tourists or travelers from the Chinese mainland were molested. 2 were severely, detained and attacked. Some days ago. As for the inspection at the borders, I strongly believe that because China is a country under the rule of law, and the authorities will act accordingly in accordance with the laws.
OK. How do you think this is all going to end? It's been ongoing now for some time. What's going to happen next?
I don't have the crystal ball. I read that some protesters plan to obstruct the Hong Kong airport, international airport again. But the courts have issued an injunction order to forbid anybody from obstructing the highway, obstructing the Hong Kong airport. Actually, I read in the Extinction Rebellion in the UK that some people were convicted because for obstructing the highway, obstructing the police. And I understand at that time, the aviation minister or your government, your political leaders warned that obstructing the Hong Kong airport might carry a maximum life sentence. The police in Hong Kong had said the same thing, that obstructing the airport is a serious crime, serious offence.
There's a stalemate, though, isn't there? The protesters I spoke to over the weekend said there is no way they're going to back down. They're going to carry on their fight. The Hong Kong government has said that it's not going to back down. So far, Carrie Lam certainly hasn't said that she's going to scrap this bill altogether. You've made it very clear that Beijing is standing firm. Something has got to give.
We are standing firm behind the Hong Kong SAR government. We are standing firm behind the Hong Kong police in enforcing the rule of law. So we are standing firm behind the Hong Kong people so that their demands for a peaceful life will be met. The chief executive has already said that she will start new platforms of dialogue, and she and the government want dialogue. So we think dialogue and compromise and consensus should be the only way out. Violence certainly is not the way of solving the problems, which every society has different problems. But the violence, breaking the law, is not the correct path to solve these problems.
And very briefly, and just finally, do you have any sympathy at all with the peaceful protesters?
No, peaceful. I can't say no. I mean, peaceful protest is never a problem in Hong Kong.
It's a problem in China,
isn't it? You could see this because we adopt one country, two systems. And on Chinese mainland, the Chinese people also are guaranteed to the right to protest, the right of assembly. But in the meantime, we stress a lot on stability. We think China has benefited hugely from stability, and the people cherish this stability. That's why when what happens in Hong Kong, when the riots happen in Hong Kong, the people on the Chinese mainland are very concerned. They are very worried. So without stability, you can achieve nothing.
Okay,
stability is of high importance to all of us, Chinese mainland and Hong Kong. Maybe to some extent to the UK, and also dialogue.
Is the way to solve it. Okay, and Mark Hui, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
We appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.